I'm Trisha, a rising sophomore majoring in English and minoring in creative writing. Today we have with us Professor Ouma.
Hi, I'm Christopher Ouma. I am incoming associate professor of English at Duke University, and it's such a pleasure to be here.
So my first question for you is about the class that you're scheduled to teach this fall. You're going to teach the art of reading, small magazines, and African literary modernity. What might students learn in this class, and how will your course be structured?
So thank you for that question. The objective of the course is to introduce students to the field of African literature, broadly speaking, and more specifically, modern African literature. The period that the course is going to focus on is the second half of the 20th century. So between the 1950s into the new millennium. And the course is, the objective is to center the literary magazine as a form that is doing a whole range of things for modern African literature, one of which is it was a form that was quite central to the beginnings of the institution of modern African literature. So all the broad debates about the modern African novel, modern African poetry, and broadly speaking, modern sort of African cultural identity. So that's a major role that these literary magazines played at the beginning. And then the more interesting role towards the end of that century and into the new millennium was how African forms of imagination were sort of evolving into the digital age. And the small magazine played a significant part in enabling that transition. And so the course is divided in two parts. In the first half of the semester, we're going to be focusing on magazines in the 50s and 60s, which was a really interesting period where many African countries were getting their independence. And we'll be looking at transition from Uganda, Black authors from Nigeria. There's a classic from South Africa. We're looking at how they were sort of charting and curating this moment, a really, really incredible moment, moment of independence, new nation states, the idea of sort of institutionalizing African imagination. So that was a really exciting moment. And then the second half of the semester, we're going to gear up to the more millennial literary magazines that are moving into the digital space, that are exploiting much younger audiences, new urban languages. It's interesting. I've got I don't know if you'd like me to show you, I've got one of the magazines that I'm hoping we can look at. It's called Kwani, and it comes out of Nairobi. And you'll be able to see just the beauty and the sort of edgy idea of literary form that these magazines are playing. So the second half of the year will be about the more millennial magazines moving into the digital age, engaging with digital audiences, interfaces with social media, very, very exciting things. So that's how the course is going to be structured. I should say 50, 60 years of sort of these literary magazines and how they really created conditions for the emergence of African literature.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing and for showing us that literary magazine. And you mentioned the different forms of imagination that literary magazines have. And I think they're an interesting form because it's a place where the creative and the critical come together. How do you see this being reflected in your coursework? And are there any assignments or activities that you're particularly excited about?
Thank you. And that's the core of what I'm hoping the students can come out with and focus on and sort of engaging with the form itself. Because the literary magazine is not like a novel, and it's not like a poem or a play. It's a form that constitutes multiple other forms in it. I think the beauty of it and the more exciting thing about the literary magazine is that you can find on the same or contiguous pages, you can find a poem, and then on the other page, excuse me, a graphic story, for instance. Or you find certain images and photographs, different kinds of textuality. And the beauty of it is finding ways of reading these different literary forms and literary styles, and basically the different kinds of literariness. And I think the magazine gives you an opportunity to find other ways of engaging with the other sort of entry points into this thing we call literature. And I think more specifically, this thing we call African literature. I think the magazine gives you an exciting and a different way of engaging with it. You know, it's a very expansive form. You find sometimes some of the great novels that have come out of Africa have been serialized in magazines. What does it mean to serialize and break a story in small portions? How does one engage with that as opposed to sort of sitting down and reading the entire form of the novel? So there's something excitingly unwieldy about the literary magazine that I find exhilarating and different. And of course, this reflects in some of the assignments that I'm hoping the students can engage with, because the literary magazine brings together both critical and creative and different kinds of writing. Some of the assignments I'm hoping to put together would be response pieces, for instance, pieces that are inspired either by a personal essay in the magazine that responds to a specific issue. It could be a poem that is inspired by a poem that's on the page of this magazine that looks different. I don't know if I can share with you something. So, for instance, this Kwani,
Yes.
which is, it comes out of Nairobi. This was the first issue, and they were doing some very exciting things with it. This was in 2000. There was this sort of excitement about computers and Microsoft Word, and so they were trying to find ways to graft digital forms onto an actual text. And so you find, for instance, let me just try and find something here. You find, for instance, people writing short stories on email, and then they would then pick up, they would basically take screen grabs, what we call screen grabs these days, of those emails, and they would graft them onto the page of the magazine. And so you have to rethink the way you encounter that text on the magazine. I think I'll have to find this later or when we meet. But those are the exciting things for me. But also there are different languages that converge in the magazine, especially in Africa. There are stories that are written with what we call youth languages, which is a mixture of sort of English and local languages. And in the many years that I've taught literary magazines, I'm excited when I give students a short story that's been written in a pidginized form of English, and I ask them to try to sort of engage with it. So you can recognize some words because they're in English. And then you sort of try to figure out associated meanings with words that mix English and local language. And it's such an exciting exercise. And I think the beauty of it is how small magazines can convene different kinds of literary languages. And in any classroom, there are people who speak English and Spanish and Urdu or Swahili. And it's always exciting to find forms that try to experiment with a multilingual audience.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping to have assignments that sort of engage with that. I think in the more millennial digital age, I'm hoping we can do, say, website reviews, for instance. A lot of the magazines, digital magazines, housed in certain websites, and their web footprint is really their style. So how do you engage with the literary form of the web in digital format? How do you engage with it? So website reviews, and of course, the more traditional essays. I think if you want me to be more specific, I'll be thinking about 4 short writing assignments, 1 to 2 pages each, and those could be reflection pieces. They could be creative pieces inspired by something in the magazine, and then 3 graded papers, which would be the more sort of traditional essays. I hope that answers your question. So I'm excited about just the range of different kinds of evaluation and different kinds of writing that we can mine out of the course.
Yes, thank you. Those sound like really interesting assignments, and I'm excited to see what form those will take. My last question has to do with how students are often encouraged to read as writers and write as readers. As mentioned in the beginning, your class is listed under the Art of Reading category. What does the art of reading mean to you, and how does this influence how you teach your students to view African literary magazines?
Fantastic. That's a great question. And I think I've sort of been hinting at the answer. One of the things I've been excited about teaching literary magazines is that it comes sort of sideways from the novel or poetry, because a lot of the modernization of imagination and the institutionalization of African literature really focuses on the African novel or African poetry. And that's an incredible and a rich trajectory. But what if we think of the literary magazine as a form that gives us a different perspective into African literature? How do we develop an art of reading it that will bring in something new to the way we talk about African literature? And partly also because when you flip through the magazines themselves, as I began hinting, they will require what somebody called a redistribution of your sensibility. You're not going to read the magazine like you read a novel. You might read some forms that will require you to sort of be attuned to what you're listening, as opposed to what you're seeing on the text.
Mm-hmm.
And there are sort of visual languages that require a different way of engaging the literary magazine. So for me, the art of reading would be that. And I think that when we locate the art of reading in African literature, we have to be attuned to different kinds of imagination, different kinds of imagination, the way that they're articulated in different languages. And so I'll be sort of looking to see how our students develop an art of reading beyond the novel in the first place, but beyond normal forms of textuality. And if possible, I'm hoping that people can bring the richness of whatever other languages that they have into this classroom. I mean, in Africa, we live in a continent in South Africa, where I work and teach, there are about 11 languages. In Kenya, where I was born, there are about 42 languages. And so these languages have to find ways of interacting with each other. And I've found the small magazine one of the most exciting places where these languages interact. A final example I want to give you, in the digital sort of section of digital literary magazines, there's a really, really exciting digital magazine called Jalada. And one of the things that they did was that they took a short story that was written by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who's a very famous African writer, and they have translated it into over 100 languages. And it's all online, from French to Spanish to Urdu to Swahili to Zulu. And often when I put that out, I'm always interested in hearing how people with multiple sort of language backgrounds, how they engage with the story. So that's one exciting aspect of thinking about the art of reading in the age of the digital, in the age of sort of this millennial moment. I don't know if that really makes sense, but I'm hoping we can break it down when we get to class.
Yes, that was a wonderful perspective. Thank you, Professor Ouma, for speaking with us today, and we're really excited to welcome you to Duke in the fall.
Thank you, Trisha. Thank you for your time and for those questions, and I look forward to this exciting material. I can't wait.